What's up? Welcome back. Double bonus show is back. I know I've been a little bit slacking. I didn't post any of the predictions I said I was going to post. I got my Xavier jersey on today. It's game day against Texas Southern. But I'm here to preview a little bit of what's going on in college basketball today. Just kind of the matchups I'm interested by, what I'm going to be watching, where my attention is going to lie, and what I'm most excited to kind of see as the season goes on. It starts early, noon. Charleston, Southern Illinois on YouTube. Really stoked about this game. Excited to see kind of where Southern Illinois is. They've lost so much talent over the last few years. It's going to be interesting to see where this team is. And then for Charleston, they have been at the top of their league for so long, and I would assume that that dominance continues, but we'll have to see how this goes for Charleston this year. But my assumption is that they run the league again. That's kind of what everybody's predicting. They've been atop of the CAA for a while. There are some good teams in that conference. We've seen good things. We saw good stuff from Stony Brook last year. We saw good stuff from Towson last year, from Hofstra last year. So interested to see how Charleston looks in comparison to all of those teams. The next game, and by the way, I am skipping some. Obviously, the first game of the day starts in about 26 minutes. I'm recording this about 10:30. It is IU Indy against IU Columbus. IU Indy, formerly IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. They're now Indiana University, Indianapolis. The Jaguars. They play the first game of the day. I know everybody's excited. They're kind of like the darling. They're like the fan favorite for everybody in the college basketball space. Um, I'll probably have that game on in the background, but really excited for Charleston, Southern Illinois. And then 3 o'clock, I think the game of the early slate, in my opinion, Santa Clara, St. Louis, two mid-majors that could make a ton of noise this season. I'm really excited about St. Louis. They got a new coach in John Schertz, comes over from Indiana State. He brings with him mega star from last year, Robbie Avila, brings over really good player from Indiana State, Isaiah Swope, keeps Gibson Jimerson. The only person that they lose is, so they lose Tucker DeVries. He follows his dad Darian to West Virginia. But this is a really, really strong team in St. Louis. This is the year for the A10. Everybody is predicting the Atlantic 10 to be one of the stronger teams one of the stronger conferences in the country this year, and I'm right there with them. This is their year, I think, to be a two-bid league, maybe three. We're going to need to see a lot from Dayton and VCU, I think, and SLU to get them to three, but there's a ton of talent in this conference. There always is. I'm stoked to see what St. Louis. This is a neutral site game. It's in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It is against Santa Clara, who was up and down all of last season and was a fun story for a lot of the year. They've got a really good player, their best player, Adama Ball, 14 points last year as a junior. He's now a senior. He's from France. He is going to be the X factor in this game. I know that sounds dumb because he's the best player, but his matchup with Robbie Avila and Isaiah Swope will be the difference in this game. Specifically, his one-on-one matchup with the St. Louis guards, but I'm saying star versus star, Avila versus Ball. But specifically, his matchup with probably Swope's going to get the assignment. We'll see. I'm excited to see this. I think St. Louis is a good team. I think they're the better team. They're 1.5-point underdogs. I'm riding with the Billikens in this game. If you're a betting person, I'm a betting person. I'm riding with St. Louis. I think that they take this one. I've got them parlayed with Charleston. I think both of these teams win. And this, to me, is the game of the early slate. Two mid-majors that I think could make some noise in their conference, and two mid-majors that I think you have to watch out for. If they're playing against a high-major opponent, you have to watch out for these teams. They are very talented. And remember, that Indiana State team was good last year. And they have probably a similar amount of talent to what this St. Louis team has. I think the St. Louis team's probably better. But you think about that team, they had Swope and Conwell and Avila really as their three-headed monster. Conwell obviously now with my Musketeers. And then Swope and Avila both go to St. Louis. St. Louis, I think, is a threat to win the A10. They're really good, but the thing about the West Coast Conference is it's so hard to predict because they could be a two-bid league. They could be a three-bid league if San Francisco or Santa Clara or somebody steps up. St. Mary's and Gonzaga kind of feel like guarantees every single year. It's can a third team do enough? Can Santa Clara upset a St. Mary's at home? Can they upset a Gonzaga at home? Can they win games like this in a neutral site against a good St. Louis team? Santa Clara's got some interesting games at Nevada. That one is, I believe, that's a true road game. So that will be a good one. At TCU could be an interesting quad one game. At McNeese is a super interesting game. When you look at the net ratings and where those start to land, if Santa Clara starts to rattle off a few of these, you just never know where they're going to end up. You're looking at St. Louis, at Nevada, at TCU, all potentially being quad one or quad two games. Not to mention the ones you're going to play in conference at San Francisco, at St. Mary's, at Gonzaga. You've got at Oregon State because they're playing in the West Coast Conference this year. You're home for Washington State. You've got Washington State, excuse me. You got Washington State on a home and home, Oregon State on a home and home. So you've got some really interesting teams on your schedule if you're Santa Clara. We scroll down a little bit. There's a couple of games that I'm going to be watching. I don't have thoughts and notes on everything. Just excited to see McNeese State play basketball again. They've got South Dakota State. They are playing also in Sioux Falls. It's the game kind of right after. It's the showcase game. I believe it's the Field of 68 showcase or whatever the heck they're calling it. It's in the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls. That's Charleston, the Charleston game, the Santa Clara game, and then the McNeese game. Just excited to see McNeese play basketball again, man. This team was so much fun last year, and they're going to be so much fun again this year. They brought in a ton of talent. This team is going to be just as good as they were last year. Probably, to be honest with you, even better. They bring in Sincere Parker, the transfer from St. Louis. They brought in Quadir Copeland, the transfer from Syracuse. Like, this team just brought in so much talent from last year, and they bring a good amount of players back. Christian Shumate, who was their second best player last year, is back. The only player that they really lost of note was Shahade Wells, and then they continually added talent on top of that. So stoked to just watch McNeese play basketball. They are 6.5-point favorites in this game. I think they win. The only reason they don't cover is because this is a kind of a home game for South Dakota State. We don't think that's technically their arena, but it's really, really close. So it's a neutral site, but it's kind of not. I wonder how like the committee and the net and Ken Pom and everybody kind of looks at that game. Do you call that a neutral site game for McNeese, or do you call that a road game? Because it's not that far from, I believe South Dakota State plays in Brookings, South Dakota. So I don't know the geography of South Dakota, but I know, look, it's a hell of a lot closer for the Jackrabbits than it is for the McNeese Cowboys. We move into the later slate. There's not a ton to kind of look at until we get to 7:30 p.m. Texas A&M at UCF on ESPN Plus. Texas A&M, I think, is 4-point favorites on the road in Orlando against UCF. Huge test. Huge early test. Shout out to these two teams. They're not doing bye games. They're having some fun. This is an interesting road game early in the season for Texas A&M. First game of the season, you're going on the road, playing a Big 12 opponent who's got a lot of questions. A lot of people, I think, like where UCF is at. Keyshawn Hall, a big transfer for them. This is an interesting roster. Texas A&M is really, really good, or should be really, really good, or is supposed to be really, really good. However you want to say that about the Aggies. They need this game. They have to go in there and play well and prove that they're one of the top teams in the SEC. Because I'll tell you this right now. If you can't, in game number 1, go into Orlando and beat a UCF team that you're better than, you are not going to go into Auburn and win. You're not going to go to Alabama and win. You're probably not going to go to Florida and win. You're not going to go to Tennessee and win. You're not going to go to Kentucky. Like, you're not going to go to those places and win necessarily if you can't beat UCF, because I think UCF is a step below Kentucky and Arkansas and Tennessee and Auburn, obviously Bama, but Bama might be in their own stratosphere at this point. So a really big test. Wade Taylor and the guys kind of need this one. In my mind, if you're Texas A&M and you lose this one, you're already looking at the rest of the season like, boy, we've already lost our first road game of the year. We've got to bounce. Now, it is a road game, so at least if you're losing this game, you're losing on the road. But this is one, if you're the Aggies, I think you got to go assert your dominance, and prove that you're one of the top teams in the SEC, and prove how deep this SEC really is. I think the SEC could be the best conference in the sport. It's between them or the Big 12. I think I would lean SEC, but I think it's really, really close. I think when you take the top five teams in the SEC and translate them to the top five teams in the Big 12, it's really close. But you're looking at like Arkansas versus Arizona, and that's a really, really interesting battle. I like the SEC. Huge game for Texas A&M to prove how dominant they really are in a road environment that's going to be hostile. It's going to be loud. You're telling me an SEC's team's coming in the first game of the season. The students have been waiting all summer, really, on fall for this. UCF's football team has kind of faded recently. I know this isn't a college football podcast, but point being, I think the fans are just ready to go. I think they're ready for the basketball season. 10:30 out in Vegas, Ohio State and Texas at T-Mobile Arena on TNT. Texas favored by 3. Huge early season test for the Buckeyes. Texas is ranked in the AP poll. I really, really like where the Buckeyes are at. I love what they did in the portal. I love what Jake Diebler did for this team at the end of the season. Hell of a job from him to come in, be the interim, start winning games, and really get Ohio State basketball back where they needed to be. Look, Chris Holtmann was a good coach. He was a phenomenal recruiter, but the in-game stuff and the game management and the actual coaching and the product on the court was just not good enough for Ohio State. And I know you think about Ohio State and they're a proud football school. This is a proud basketball school. This is a basketball institution that was at the top of the Big Ten and the top of the world for a while. Now, they didn't win the national championship. They ended up losing it to Florida in their back-to-back years under Billy Donovan. But this is a team that, and a school that really does like their basketball. And if their basketball is good there, the fans in Columbus will appreciate it. They will flock to that arena and they will root for the Buckeyes. The fans in Columbus, I know for a fact because I root for Ohio State football, the fans in that city get behind their sports teams. And if you give them a good Ohio State basketball team, they'll get behind it. Now for Texas, ranked, brand new roster, a lot of expectations. Jordan Pope coming in, a couple of different guys coming in, a lot of interesting things on the roster after a season last year that was not exactly what they wanted from Texas. I know they have kind of questions about where their program is at right now. This is a huge game for both sides. I don't think a loss. This is different from Texas A&M, where I don't know that a loss hurts one of these teams. Not that a loss hurts Texas A&M, but I don't think a loss hurts one of these two teams as much. I think if either one of these two teams, whichever team wins, if the team that loses plays a competitive and a battle and they play well in a neutral site against another good team, I think you feel good about where both of these teams are. I don't think either one of them are at the level of the Aggies, and that's why I think the Aggies have a lot more pressure on them to go into a road environment and win. And maybe that's just me being, I don't know, biased towards the SEC and thinking that they're better than everybody and whatever it is. But to me, these two teams are very close in talent. Ohio State got votes. Like, it's not like they're not ranked. They would have been ranked if you did a top 35. And look, the AP poll doesn't mean anything, guys. Never forget that. Don't pay attention to the AP poll. It doesn't really mean anything. It is there as an organization system so that the TV networks and the sports apps can just put a little number next to their name so you can see how good they are. The net, the Ken Palm strength schedule, like all that stuff matters more. Regardless, these are two teams that are probably top 40 in the country. It's different for Texas A&M too because they're playing a UCF team that we don't know anything about. These two teams, I think, both have expectations in their conference, and I think both have a ton of talent, and I'm excited to watch this one. The game of the day is at 11:30 on ESPN2 in Spokane, Gonzaga and Baylor. Baylor right now favored, or excuse me, underdogs by 6. Gonzaga favored by 6 points. Just a huge game. And another one where I don't know how much it says about either team going into the game. I think it says a lot about either team coming out of the game. This is going to matter when we see the final score and we see what both teams looked like on the court. I think very similarly to Texas and Ohio State, this will be a game that when we see what happens on the court and we do an episode tomorrow recapping these games, we'll know more about both of these teams and we'll know what are they coming out as, what's the flow, what do they look like, how do they play. Like, there is so much that goes into these two teams. There's new players on Baylor. Gonzaga bringing back a whole new, basically bringing back the same roster. Like, very interesting dynamic. Down year last year for Gonzaga. Some disappointment again last year for Baylor near the end. And some injuries, some not as good as health as maybe they wanted. These are two teams that I think are going to put on a absolute show. The question being, is Baylor back to being a dominant force again? And is Gonzaga going to start the season strong this year? Because they did not last year. They had to make up ground late. They had to make up a lot of ground late to slide into the tournament. By the way, going back on teams that start slow, Aggies, please figure it out on the road. They start slow every year. They get behind the 8 ball. This is exactly what we were talking about. That's exactly what I was talking about like 5 minutes ago with A&M. Same thing for Gonzaga. You cannot start the season slow. You have to get out on the right foot. You have to go and beat Baylor. And if you lose, it better not be in some Baylor just comes into your house and whacks you. If they win on a buzzer beater, whatever. You lost to a good team on a buzzer beater in the first game of the season. These are probably two teams that I think could compete for a national championship. I don't think the same about Texas and Ohio State. I think those are two tournament caliber teams. These are two national championship contenders, and we're going to see them go toe to toe in the first game of the season, and I am stoked for that. We will wrap that up here. Tomorrow, I'm hoping I'm going to do a recap. We'll recap everything we saw from these games, and we'll get a better idea of where this is at. For now, that's just a quick preview. I know there's not a lot to say about these teams right now, but tomorrow we'll be back. We'll recap everything we saw from day one of the college basketball season. See you next time on the Double Bonus Show.